We're gonna teach that boogie and rock the joint tonight. We're teaching that boogie and rock.
Welcome everybody to episode number 8 of my little podcast. I am Glenn Hallam and I am coming at you from Weldon in Northamptonshire, which is a small village, getting bigger, a small village just the other side of Corby. Firstly, I have to say, it's been a while since I've done a podcast, but my hat goes off to those of you that do it on a regular basis. It is very time consuming, and the effort that needs to, for those people to bring podcasts to you is amazing. So please, search through your podcast app and listen to some of those, those podcasts that people do. There's kind of every subject that you could ever imagine. The work involved is amazing. So congratulations to you guys, but please support them because without your support, obviously they cannot do them. Why has it taken me so long to do this? Well, yeah, of course we all have priorities, and basically my priorities are looking after children and teaching them music. I've had actually a good 2021, and being the case is that I've always enjoyed my teaching, but early March we started back when the restrictions lifted, and I was immediately asked to do some classroom teaching as well as the peripatetic lessons that I do on guitar and drums. And so that was not only a challenge for me, but something to tick off my list that I wanted to do. We have to support the teachers. I have to say this because now I've experienced actually classroom teaching. They are amazing. What they do, they're looking after your children, they're educating them, they're encouraging them, they're doing all those things. And over the pandemic, we can't not mention the pandemic, can we? Every time we talk, I think somebody mentions about COVID. This will be the only mention of it, I promise you. So mental health has been a big issue for a lot of children, and getting them back into school, well, it's a little bit of a sigh of relief for sure. So not only that have I been doing the classroom teaching, but I've also been studying over the last 2-3 years now because of the pandemic. I've been studying my teaching degree, and that has finally come to an end, because at the end of November I did my final exam, which was a practical exam. It went very well. I thought it went very well. I'm yet to receive my result from that. Fingers crossed, should be okay. And where that leads me, I don't know. Maybe do some more classroom teaching. But what I've learned from doing that is, a different approach to my lessons, and hopefully get the most out of my children and, of course, adults. I teach over 40 students a week, the drums and a few guitars. If I can get them playing and really kind of, as I get older, replacing me with, my gigging life and whatever. But we'll see how that goes. So that has been really cool. As well, for 2021, I had a phone call one day asking if I would play drums on a record from a local studio that I quite often rehearse at. I've known the gentleman's name is Dave, and the studio is Beck's Recording Studio in Wellingborough. So he phoned me one day and he said, we're having trouble with the drummer, and would you kindly come and record the track and see what they think? Well, of course I said yes. Well, further conversations with the guy at the studio, with Dave at the studio, it turned out to be a gentleman called Ronnie Harwood. Now, Ronnie Harwood might not immediately come to your head as if to say, oh yeah, I know that is. I know who that is. But Ronnie was the guy that wrote You Drive Me Crazy from Shakin' Stevens. And he also wrote many other hits in the rock and roll world, such as God Bless Rock and Roll from Bill Haley. It was one of the actual last songs that Bill Haley did before he passed away. So to find that out, I was like, wow, you really want me to do this? Now, it was the truth behind that was that they were having trouble with drummers that were playing that weren't really getting the sound that they needed for the record. Well, anyway, cut long story short, I did the record, and he liked it. Because we kind of upped the game a little bit, some other people were asked to play the record and replace the original demo. And so we had people like Bob Cotton from the Jets was actually playing the bass on it. There was Shakin' Stevens, piano player on it. And so it was a big deal for me. But yeah, cut that long story a little shorter. I'm on that record. I'm waiting for that to be released and see what's happening with it. I don't know. There are rumors, but I can't divulge in that right now because I have no idea where it's going to go. So overall, not a bad 2021. To further that story a little bit, I also managed to, off the back of that, there was another writer that was doing an album who had a record deal, and he asked if I would play one of his records. He was also having trouble with the drummer, and I'm now in that band. I'm due to go into the studio with them in a couple of weeks to record. I've been sent some demos and that have literally nothing on them. It's just his name's Dave as well, singing with his guitar, and that's it. And that's what I've got to develop that and see what we get out of that. So that's quite exciting. So that's a good start to 2022. Now, obviously trying to get that in and with your work schedule and all the teaching that I'm doing, I'm busy. So hence the reason my podcast is kind of took a back seat, really. So there you go. I almost feel like I'm apologizing to my thousands of listeners, which I don't have. But there you go. Anyway, I'm having fun. So my last podcast, in episode 7, I talked to one of my big heroes. And if you've watched it or listened to it, please go back and listen to episode 7. Flute Varnfield, a big hero of mine in the drumming world. And we have an interesting chat about everything. So go and check that out for me as well. But inspiration from our heroes, I've had many. And if I think back and, some of them heroes that I just still to this day, all these years on, want to be like them. And, the 80s was a great time for me. It was a decade of discovering music, discovering what I liked in music, what I wanted to play, what kind of character I was going to be as a drummer. And so flute, in my last interview, helped me massively with that. But then I kind of moved into the 90s and I was on my own, really. I didn't, I think at the time flute had moved away and we were in less contact than we were before. But I still had that drive of being the best drummer that I could ever be. And somebody told me a long time ago, you're only as good as the people you play with. And it's so true. So I remember hanging around in my last podcast. I keep referring to that because it's a carry on from the story. The bunch of guys that I was playing with, we often, they were just doing the pub stuff and typical Hotel California and that kind of thing. But we'd often come across another bunch of guys who we'd get together and play with. Well, the bass player at the time was a guy called Chris Willis, and he lived in Wellingborough. And he'd got the Fender Precision bass and in that scenario. But then it turned out that he was heavily into rock and roll, and he was into rock and roll that much that he'd learnt to play the stand-up bass. Now, you got to bear in mind that time I hadn't really come across that. I'd listened to early Elvis records and didn't really think about it. What kind of instruments they were doing, what kind of sound, was it important? I just liked the records and that was it. So I remember a place called Urchester, which is not far from here, about a half an hour's drive away from here. And there was a pub called the Crow's Nest. And the Crow's Nest was, it was your typical like lounge bar at the front kind of scenario. And on a Tuesday evening, The lounge wasn't being used. So you could hire this lounge and you could go there to jam. And we did. Now, Chris invited me to play drums with them. Now, he'd got a bunch of other guys together who I didn't know. And I went along. Of course I did. It was playing music. It was something different. I was on this mission to discover other things. And so we arrived there and we were playing typical pub stuff, all right now, free, that kind of scenario. But then he brought a friend with him. And this friend was Pete Turlin. Now, Pete Turlin was an incredible musician. But at that particular time, I didn't really know or get what it was all about. But he brings in this double bass. Now, bearing in mind, Chris had one as well. So, having not seen these things, two people were in the same room with a double bass. Now, I didn't really think much of it. And my recollection of that particular night is not really musical. It's more about the character that this guy was. I can't remember us actually playing together, although I'm sure we did. Pete Turlin, I was around 17 years old then. And so he came along, he played with us, I think, and then he went on his merry way. I didn't really see him that often after that. And it turned out that he was he'd left the UK and got an offer of a gig out in Canada. And it was quite a good gig. It was a big gig playing to big audiences. And for that reason, I'd met this guy, I was like, wow, I met him that night. But I was hearing these stories via this Chris Willis, who was telling me that Pete was doing this, Pete was doing that. Now, I didn't really know him as well as what Chris did, but there was something that I could relate to in the early 90s. It's got to be around 90s. And I could relate to it. I wanted to be that guy that was being called to ask to do a tour. So this name of Pete Turlin was thrown around for quite a few years. Now, a few years later, having, discussed this guy quite a few times, he came back to the UK. Now, he came back to the UK because allegedly a tour had broken up. So it was a Canadian band. He'd been in various bands in Canada, but a Canadian band had broken up, come to the UK to do Hemsby Rock and Roll Weekender. And he'd done that festival, and I think at some point his parents were here. He'd made the decision, for whatever reason, it made the decision that he wanted to stay here. So I'd been playing a little bit through those years, with various people. But out of the blue, Chris phoned me and said, Pete's back in town. Now, do you fancy playing drums? We'll put a band together, just the three of us. Now, okay, yeah, I'm up for that. No two ways about it. Now, he came, I met him. I felt that I knew him anyway, because we'd talked so much about what he was doing. But it's what happened afterwards, and when we got in the band, that things changed. Now, Pete come about, we discussed it, we, shook our hands and whatever and met up, and then we started doing some rehearsings. And within a few weeks of him being back, we started gigging the working men's club circuits. Now, when we started, he was having to set up a life here as well. I mean, he was getting a house, getting a car. He had to find a job because he needed the money because he just decided to come back home. He got a day job, and we were earning quite good money at the time playing in working men's clubs. So we would play, over in Northampton. But what really happened is that we got this bond. I was interested in what he'd done. I was interested in why he went to Canada. What did he do in Canada? I had like 5 or 6 years to catch up with what he'd been doing. Why was he so special? Well, he was playing guitar for us because Chris was playing bass, although, like I said earlier, he was a bass player. He was playing guitar for us. I'd never seen anybody play guitar like he did. And he was playing songs that I'd never heard of. But I loved at the same time. They were old blues records, old rockabilly records from the 50s. And for that reason, he had that hold on me. Now, through that period, we did a lot of shows and we were doing clubs. But during our time off, I mean, I was working during the day as well, but we'd hang out in the evening. He would have a huge record collection. And this record collection would have, again, all these artists that I didn't really know. But he would play me these records and say, "Can you hear that sound? Can you?" He was a musician. He wanted me to sound like some of these people on the record. And I did my best to try and do that with a twist on what I did. And so we spent a few beers sitting in this kitchen table with this little record player, playing these records, and I was blown away by this. And he had the ability to find the chords, play this record, make it sound like it was, put his little twist on it. And the band grew. The band grew because I was growing as well. Chris was growing as well. It was like we were playing with a guy that was making us better. And like I said at the beginning, you're only as good as the people you play with. And that was certainly the case. Now, we named ourselves the Shakers. PT in the Shakers, actually, because of his name, Pete Turlin. So it was PT in the Shakers. We just got this following of people, only through the Working Men's Club. But we got these following of people that would turn up and watch this gig. My mum would come, my stepdad would come. It was exciting, all right? And it was exciting. And, of course, during our long journeys, sometimes we'd play in London. I got to play in Goldhawk Road, which is where the Stones and the Beatles would always play. And so we shared many of the stages down there. And again, one of my previous podcasts, I was saying about London. London was the most amazing place in the world. And I was playing on stages where, bands as big as the Rolling Stones played there. So it was an exciting time. So as this grew, Pete wanted to go in the studio. And I'm trying to think back now, actually, how many times at that point I'd actually been in the studio. And I can't. And I think it was my first experience of really working and trying to learn what the process was. And anyway, to cut that shorter, we came out that studio after a few days, playing. There's about 12 songs on a demo CD. And now, bearing in mind, we just come out of the 80s, we're in the 90s, everybody's listening to records on CD as opposed to vinyl. I've got this CD and it has my drumming on it. And I am so damn happy about the quality of this record. Now, off the back of this demo, and there's a reason I'm calling it a demo, this demo, we managed to get Hemsby, which was the big rock and roll weekender, and I do believe it still is. I've been many times, haven't been recently. I don't think anybody's been recently, but it started up again, I think. And so that was the big gig for those that played rock and roll music. And that was originally the gig he did before the band split up, and that was the reason he came back to the UK. So we played Hemsby, and we did a couple of songs and stuff, and that was my first time that I ever got to sing a song. And it was, in fairness, it was a 4:00 gig, so there wasn't too many people around, but it was, nevertheless, it was a big stage. My drums were mic'd up. It sounded fantastic. Pete's playing through these twin Fender amps, and And it's that we spent the next 3 days there, and we just had loads and loads of fun. And so I was living the dream. And talk about inspiration from our heroes. I knew that this guy had played on all these records previously that he'd been playing on during his time in Canada before we got to know each other better. And so for me, it's like playing with the Beatles. It was that good. But not only that, when you play with somebody, and I think this is a learning curve for a lot of musicians, when you play with somebody that you hold in such high esteem, it can make you a bit anxious and a bit nervous. But Pete was the kind of guy that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And it was, and the music happened. And it was incredible, right? So I'm living the dream. I'm thinking that, I'm the best thing ever. My drumming is really coming together. So I thought, but we'll come to that in a second. So I do these gigs and we carry on, and we're traveling down to London. We do the Hemsby thing, and then we actually as well, and just coming to my mind now, I remember him. We actually did the boats for a little while, where we were the band that was playing on the ferries that were going back from the Hook of Holland and the Zeebrugge backwards and forwards. So you'd play one night, have a night off. And again, the experience of doing that, but also the social aspect of it as well was fun. The people you met, sound checking during the day when the boat was empty, and all that experience. It was quite funny, actually. As you can imagine, a bunch of young guys on a boat. You never know what we got up to, but mostly nothing bad. It was just kind of plenty. We weren't allowed to drink. And what you found, right? I got to tell you this now, haven't I? You weren't allowed to drink on ferries because you're considered to be staff, even though you're the musician, right? And the reason you're considered to be staff is because of the safety aspect of it. Because if you're in the middle of the water, you can be allocated a lifeboat, so you're in charge of getting the general public onto a lifeboat. Now, I know. And so you had these early morning calls to go to the lifeboat training. Of course, we got into trouble because we were never there. So we broke a few rules in that. But the reason you couldn't drink was that. And this is because we did it on a regular basis, you got to know the lorry drivers that purchased drink and brought you it. Whether this goes on now, I have no idea. I don't know what the rules are. So we got in with this lorry driver, and apparently, still to this day, I don't really know this is true. Vodka, you can't smell vodka. I think it's untrue, actually, because I got caught. You can't smell vodka. So they were giving us vodka and Coke. So we're walking around with a glass of Coke, and they're thinking it's just Coke. We're not drinking because we're on lifeboat duty. I go up to a guy and I'm sitting there, and he says, "Have you been drinking?" I said, "No, we're not allowed to." And he said, "Well, why can I smell drink?" So, no, clearly you can smell vodka. It was funny at the time. I mean, it's totally irresponsible, I suppose, when you think back of it, because you were genuinely in charge of lifeboats. So the last thing you needed was a hangover or to be under the influence of alcohol if something had happened. Thankfully, nothing happened, of course, but hey, you can't be too careful. The other strange thing about playing on a boat that I have to share with you is, and if I can describe this in a way so you can imagine what it was like, you'd be playing the gig, all right, and your brain thinks you're in any other venue. It's just a stage. So you forget that you're on a boat. And after a while, you get used to the movement of the boat. And you genuinely think you could be in a bar in London playing a gig. Now, the trouble is, it's only when you look out the windows that are on the side of the boat whilst you're playing, as I did, is that you start realizing you're on that boat. One side, you've got sea. The other side, you've got the sky. Because what is happening is the boat is rocking from one side to another. But up to that point, you don't feel it. Then when you see it, your head plays tricks on you. And it's the weirdest feeling going. But there you go. I guess you got to sit on the stage to experience that. But it was an amazing time. And it was certainly experience for music as well, because like I said, during the day, me and Pete would often sit there talking about music, go to the stage, sound check, and play some different tunes. And so along with that, we would talk about these. But after we got back off that particular, I guess you can call it a tour, kind of, we started listening to more music again, and so it went on. And he introduced, and I have to just say this because the story gets a little bit more intense later on. He played with a guy that played on the waterfront in Portland, and that guy was called Harp Dog Brown. Now, Harp Dog played a Jules harp. That's the twangy thing. He would play a harmonica. Can't even say it now, can I? Mouth organ, my father would call it. So he would play blues harp, and he played for him for quite a time during that period he was in Canada. And again, because Pete had played me his music, I loved his music. I just heard these tunes and thought, I wish I could do this. Now, there's two reasons I'm saying that. Unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, Harp Dog passed away, and I was gutted. At this point, I'd never met him, but I will put that right in a second. So, I'd listened to his music, and it was amazing. Now, the Waterfront is a blues festival in Portland, in Oregon, and there's the other connection, is that my son moved to America, my eldest son, who's now in his 30s, but had moved to America and actually, a musician as well, a bass player, and actually got to play that venue. So I was totally jealous. I got to know where that venue was. But Harp Dog was an incredible. Harp Dog, I think it's Harp Dog and the Bloodhounds. That album is still out there. Harp Dog was a very, very successful blues player coming out of Canada, and he'll be greatly missed by a lot of people, and such a nice guy. And I'll tell you my meeting of him in a while. Now, so this point, I'm just reeling everything. I'm just digging the whole thing. I think I'm on top of the world. I think I'm the best drummer in the world. I'm the luckiest drummer in the world because I'm playing with Pete and playing with Chris, and we're doing really well. Then comes the bombshell. The bombshell is Pete tells me, I think he phones me up and says, Glenn, I'm really, really sorry. I'm moving to Canada. And so his time in the UK was done. PT and the Shakers were going to be no more. Pete had been offered a gig with Ray Kondo and the Ricochets, and they were also huge out in Canada. And so what do? I've built up a friendship with this guy. I don't want him to go. Of course I don't. I'm enjoying PT and the Shakers and everything we're doing. I can't be that selfish. He goes. All right? I'm gutted. But the good thing from there on in, he's phoning me in the middle of the night because of the time difference and telling me what he's getting up to. So I'm still inspired by him. I've lost my gig. I haven't got any gigs. All right? I haven't got any gigs. So I start going through the papers. The Loot, that was it. The Loot was a paper. And I remember being in Sainsbury's for a shopping. Of course, what else would you go there for? I was doing the shopping, and it was where they used to have the kind of, when you walked in, they'd have all the papers and stuff like that, and so you'd look through them. So in my I can't believe I was that tight. I didn't even buy this copy of The Loot. I actually flicked through the pages, and there was a rock and roll trio band that was wanting a drummer, and I answered that advertisement or advertisement. I can't talk this morning. Not enough coffee. I answered this advert, and then that's another story that we'll come to, and that was Wild, and that is the band I am in to this day. But anyway, so like I say, I'll fill you in about that later. So I got myself another gig as well, but I'm still talking to Pete backwards and forwards, and he's doing really well with Ray Kondo. He sent me the new albums he's done. They are so good. They are just immense. He's playing bass on that gig, and it's just incredible. He's touring the whole of America. He's on CBS in the morning. It's the proper deal. And to be fair, I'm jealous, yeah, of course, but incredibly proud of that he had that experience and he wanted to do it, but he was good enough to do it. And he still tells me stories of those days even now. Unfortunately, another one passed. Ray Kondo passed away as well. But thankfully, I did get to meet him as well, thanks to Pete. So this all comes in. It's such a short podcast. It's very hard to over these last 30 years almost to get all the stories in. But so what do I do? What do I do? Well, going back to when Pete was there and before he went, I remember the club I was at, and this is a very important fact, is that we were playing at Wootton Working Men's Club just outside Northamptonshire. And obviously, we'd still got gigs left before he left. So we were playing this gig. And at the time, I'm in between marriages, let's put it that way. And I thought to myself, because I thought I was on top of the world, I could go with him and just play drums for them. Very naively, but I thought this. So I said to Pete, I'll come with you. And Pete, without even thinking, just turned around to me and said, Glenn, you're not good enough. And for the hero of mine to turn around and say, you're not good enough, killed me. Absolutely killed me. I was sulky. I was just mad with him, everything. I don't know. I thought I was on top of the world. Of course he wants me to come and play with him. I am killer drummer. The truth of it is, I wasn't good enough. And because some of the records that he had played, those drummers were of a class of their own. And later on, I actually meet that drummer that he's working with, and he was incredible. And even in 2019, when I took a I took a trip to Vancouver, I met up with Steve Taylor, who was the drummer of that band at the time. And he's just blistering. The guy's in his 70s now, and he's still as good. Anyway, so I get to the point, I'm sulking because he's turned around and said, like, you're not good enough. But like I said, the truth was I wasn't. So what did I do? So I just joined Wild, all right? And I knew that I wasn't good enough to go with Pete. I got myself a teacher. I studied. I read. I was reading charts. I was killing the rudiments every day. I was listening to all them records that Pete had showed me or played me. And I was trying to mimic them. I was playing my blues shuffle better than ever before. Previously, I would argue and say, look, he can't possibly play that. Now I was learning them. I was working on my sound. I changed my drums. And so there's two things here. Is like I pulled my finger out. I didn't like him telling me I wasn't any good. But I loved him for the fact that he actually brought it to my attention and I needed to make more of an effort. Because if I was going to ever do anything like that, then I would need to pull my finger out, literally. And I did. But I didn't know whether I was successful at that. So we work, we practice, we work, but am I any good? I went with Wild. I blew them away. They said I got the gig. We did loads of stuff. Again, I'll come back to that in another podcast. But I was working all those little things I was learning. I was bringing into the Wild thing at the time. And I'm still speaking to Pete. Okay. And now what happens then is that I don't know what year we're on now. Gosh. Oh, Pete, forgive me. I can't remember. 2009. I think we're coming into that. I joined Wild in 2000, so I guess Pete went to Canada just before that, around 99, 2000, I don't know, somewhere around that. And so I'd been working hard, but Pete had moved around a bit because he'd been on tour, so we didn't have those midnight phone calls as much as we'd had before. But I was still listening to his record. He'd sent me those records and stuff. And one day he says, I'm getting married. And he does call me and he says, hey, Glenn, how's it going? In his English Canadian accent. I'm getting married. And I said, Pete, I'm coming to your wedding. Where the hell are you? And he was in Edmonton at the time. And he'd been with Danielle, his now wife, for a little while, and they decided that they were going to get married. He'd got a daughter as well, Presley, her name was, or still is. And I thought, this is a guy that's changed my life, but yet he doesn't know that yet. And to be fair, nor did I. To a point. I was still rehearsing. You didn't know, and that's what I was trying to make the point earlier. You do all this rehearsal, and when you're playing and practicing and making yourself a better musician, you don't actually know until it comes to a situation where you realize, okay, I got this. So anyway, I'm with Barbara at the time, and I still am. That is my wife. And I said, I need to go to Edmonton, and I need to go to Pete's wedding. And he, in fairness, he had previously been over a little bit, and I knew his father, and we kept in touch a lot that way. So anyway, we get on a flight, we go to Edmonton. Pete, I'm coming to your wedding. Fantastic, right? That would be amazing. So we get into Edmonton, we go to our hotel. I haven't met nobody yet. I speak to Pete. And he says this guy called Paul Pagatz in the same hotel. He said, why don't you go to the liquor store, as they call it, go to the liquor store, get some beer. We're meeting at this guy's house. We're going to have a beer together. And I didn't know who Paul was then. And it turned out to be Paul Pagatz, who's, if you do a Google search on him, you'll realize he's just the most incredible guitarist ever. And the nicest of guys. I can't tell you enough. He's just incredible on the guitar. So anyway, I jump in Paul's truck, never met him. Hey, you Paul, I'm Glenn. Come on, we're going around here. So I land up then going to this house after getting some beer, and we play some music. It's a brilliant. I've got Jon from who's another nice guy from a band called the Reagan Cowboys. They got a new album. It turns out Pete produced it, so they're playing me that. I'm just generally hanging out. I've never been to Canada. Well, I'd been to Vancouver previously, but I'd never been to that area of Canada, and I was just felt like I was one of the locals. It was great. Get back to the hotel. Barbara said, did you have a great night? Yep. Did you? Blah, blah. This, that, and the other. Wedding's tomorrow. We get to the wedding. Everybody's there. 50s cars. A stage. And every musician that Peter's worked with is going to do a spot at his wedding. They're going to get up. I have never met so many incredible musicians, right? And all the stories and all the albums that Pete had played me back in the late 90s when we were doing the transit runs down to London to go and do work in men's clubs, those guys were there. You thought I was in awe earlier. I was like, oh my God, that's such and such. That's such and such. That's such and such. And oh my God. And then Pete says to me, are you going to get up and play? Okay, so does all this come? Does all that practice work? All right. Okay. So I said, yeah. So I spend kind of pretty much half of that evening just anxious as anything because I don't know when I'm going to get called up. Now, here's the Harp Dog thing. Harp Dog Brown was there. This was one of my favorite records that Pete used to play. Larger than life character. Got a little bit of a beard, plays harmonica, real deep Canadian accent, right? Pete calls me, Harp Dog's going to get up. Come on, you play drums. And I'm like, oh, and I'm looking at Barbara, my wife, and I'm going, that's Harp Dog Brown. That's Harp Dog Brown. And I'm like, oh my God. Again, back to the Beatles. It's like me playing with the Beatles or Rolling Stones. I was just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Thankfully, I'd had a few pints of beer, so I was reasonably confident. I get onto the stage. I'm already playing somebody else's drum kit who's blowing me away. Anyway, they start playing, and Paul's up there, Paul Pagatz up there on guitar. And then it's sort of Pete throws me some songs and I play along and I'm holding my own. I'm being really jazzy. All the kind of swing stuff I'd been working out, during that period, was all coming out in my playing. Pete turns around at me and does after a bass solo that Harp Dog gets him to do. And he said, Glenn, and he points to me and there's a video of this. And I have to play a solo. And I'm thinking, holy moly, I got to do a solo. Actually, in fairness, thinking about it now, I didn't have time to think that. It just happened. I did that solo. Everybody goes nuts. And this is the killer bit. This is the killer bit. After we'd done that with Harp Dog turned around. I'd finished the solo, and there's for me, it's kind of like a famous saying, is that Harp Dog turned around and he went, Glenn on the tubs, and I can't mimic the Canadian accent, but he just said, Glenn on the tubs, and I was made up. And Pete was nodding, right? Pete was nodding as well. And then when we were changing over, Harp Dog come up to me and he said, I didn't know the British could play drums like that. And oh, you have no idea. Gosh, I mean, that was like, you think about the early part of the story. I wasn't good enough. And then the album that Pete had been playing me, the guy comes up to me and says, I didn't know the British could play drums like that. And Pete then kind of got involved. It was his wedding after all. Got involved, and I didn't speak to Pete. And I was buzzing. And the next day, we went to this hotel where they have a jam, and we was with Paul Pagatz, and the three of us were there. And Pete turned around and said, "Come on, we're getting up." And okay, so Paul takes the gig. He's playing guitar. Pete's playing bass. He had to play a little Fender one because they hadn't got a double bass. I then played drums, and the audience went nuts. It was ramped. They went nuts. They were asking if we were a band and this, that, and the other. So I then started playing with them, and I was just buzzing. Anyway, it comes down to this one moment for me. Now, I know I keep repeating myself. Back late 90s, wouldn't work in men's club. I'll come with you, Pete. You're not good enough. Whilst sharing a hot dog, because there was this great hot dog stand in the car park. So bearing in mind you'd had a few beers and then you go for something to eat. Hot dog. Wow. Okay. So I sit there having this hot dog, and Pete says, what have you done to your drumming? It's phenomenal. It has been amazing. He said, it's like you're a different person. And for him to say that was incredible. And that was one of my moments. Now, that took me about 4 or 5 years to master that and start being respected for, hopefully, for who I was. Okay? So, I can't tell you that moment is so important. But there's the inspiration from the heroes. The inspiration was actually Pete turning around and saying, I wasn't good enough. Now, this is quite a long story, but I'm going to wrap it up now because there's 30 years of a relationship that I could share each individual moment. But that was the main part of that story, is that always believe in what you want to do, because you might not be there now, but in the future you may well be. My future might be more teaching, more classroom teaching or whatever, but I did that and it stays with me and encourages me every day. Now, let's wrap this up. We're telling you what I've done in the meantime. From that, in 2009, Pete asked me to come over again and do some gigs. And for 6 whole years, I spent going to Canada playing with him. I got to play with Lee Rocker from the Stray Cats. I got to do loads of these venues, and we built up the Pete Turlin band in Canada when I was over there. We actually did an album. We did Cruising. The album is called Cruising. If you go to my Bandcamp, it is actually there. I recorded an album with Pete. And to this day, he will always be one of my biggest heroes. For that reason, I thank him. Now, Harp Dog passed away a couple of weeks ago. And this is what inspired me to do this. I didn't know him that well, but I did know him that well because I had that record all the time in the transit. I got to meet him. I can still hear his voice saying it was Glenn on the tubs, and what he said about me being a British guy as well. British guy, didn't know you could play like that. It all meant a lot. So, yeah, I will miss the guy, but there are millions of people that will miss him more, in a sense that I still have his records and I still have that memory. And so for that reason, I think, when you post on your Facebook about when people pass away, they have different meanings to different people. So I will miss that world. I've talked to Pete recently, and it looks like we may go back to Canada. But to be fair, I think we'll probably go and just hang out and watch some bands and enjoy just the world. So that's my story for today. So I've got more. I just got to find time to do it. Thank you for listening. Believe in yourself. It's really worth doing. Trust me, it might all work out, in the future. So thank you for listening. You are too kind. I do get the odd little message saying that they like it. I hope you do. Take care of yourself. We're coming up to spring soon, so I think, especially in the UK, we need a little bit of warmer weather, so hopefully that happens soon. So I will see you next time, and like I said, thanks for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.
I tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna dig that boogie